Hello everyone, and welcome to the Hockey Up. So today we're going to be doing another team preview, and today it is for the Vegas Golden Knights. Now Vegas obviously is one of the more popular teams in the NHL and just had another massive offseason as they tend to do. They like to make big splashes, and they certainly did so. So we're going to be looking at this team the same way we're looking at all the other teams for these team previews. We're going to look at what they added, what they lost, their top 6, their top 4, their goaltending, their best players that we should talk about, and what I would categorize them as. But to start off with what they gained. Now, they did get the big fish in free agency, Alex Pietrangelo. Pietrangelo is one of the best defensemen in the National Hockey League. I think he's the best Canadian defenseman in the National Hockey League, which is part of the reason why I'm wearing this Team Canada jersey. I don't have a Vegas jersey, obviously. But yeah, so that's a massive addition for them. He is an impact player. He is a top pairing guy. He is an all-star, a potential Norris Trophy winner. I think he could have been a Norris nominee last year. He had such a good year. That contract might not necessarily age well, but for right now, it's pretty decent because Pietrangelo truly is fantastic. They also added Carl Dahlstrom from the Winnipeg Jets. He's a bottom pairing guy, probably won't play a big role with them, but it's good to have that defensive depth. But going into what they lost. Now Vegas had to trade out 2 key pieces to get Alex Pietrangelo due to the salary cap and how close they are to it. They did trade out Nate Schmidt to the Vancouver Canucks, and that's a really big loss for Vegas. Schmidt was a top pairing guy for them and a real heart and soul player. So considering they only got back a third for him, just really doesn't look good. He was one of the most beloved guys in the locker room of Vegas, a potential nominee for the captaincy there. So losing Schmidt does hurt. I get Pietrangelo is definitely an upgrade, but when you also look at the fact that they lost Paul Stastny, one has to wonder how much better Vegas actually is, considering they lost their second-line center and a top-pairing blue liner. Stastny was really good in Vegas. I get he had a bit of a down year this past year, but his overall game is really solid. He's good in both ends. He's got good leadership and is a very smart player. I think Stastny should fit in well once again in Winnipeg, and Vegas really didn't get much back for him. Just Carl Dahlstrom and a 4th-round pick. So considering what they gave up just to basically get rid of 2 of their key pieces, I don't know. Pietrangelo is definitely an impact player, but I kind of had the same argument as I did with Toronto when they got Tavares. Yes, they got Tavares, but they also lost Van Riemsdyk and Bozak and Komarov. And it was like, yes, Tavares is definitely an upgrade on all of those guys. He is an impact player, but they lost a lot of depth. They lost some key character guys. And one has to wonder what that's going to do to the locker room, especially with the whole Marc-Andre Fleury controversy. And whether or not some of the players in that locker room feel like, you know, they're being mistreated or disrespected. You know, those core guys from that first year when they went all the way to the Stanley Cup final. But they got to realize that hockey is a business, and when you can go out and get an Alex Pietrangelo, you do so. So they had to give up those guys. I understand why they did it, but I don't necessarily know if it makes them, you know, a much better team. I think they already were a great team, and they got a bit better. They lost some pieces, but they added a big piece. But looking at their top 6 is simply fantastic. So you've got Max Pacioretty, you've got William Karlsson, you've got Mark Stone. That's probably the top line, and that's one of the best in the National Hockey League. That line can really burn you in both zones. All 3 of those players are excellent two-way players, especially Mark Stone, who was a Selke finalist. I think Mark Stone probably does have a Selke in his future. He's fantastic. Probably their best forward, but even looking at their second line, there's Alex Tuch, he could play second line, Jonathan Marchessault, Riley Smith, but the question I have with that second line is, who is going to play center? Do you move Marchessault over to center? He has played center in the past before, or do you count on a guy like Chandler Stevenson or Cody Glass to step up and play that role? I'm not sure, and if you look at Vegas' overall lineup, I think that's where the weakness is, that second line center spot. If Marchessault can have a smooth transition over to center, then it isn't really a problem. But he probably is best suited as a winger, so it's going to be interesting to see what they do to try and fill that void left by Paul Stastny. I guess only time will tell, but their wing depth is still so good that it's going to make up for that lack of center depth. They've got some of the best wingers in the National Hockey League, and one could argue the best wing depth in the National Hockey League. Their top 4 is really good as well. Now, their top four is led by the future best pairing in the NHL in Shea Theodore and Alex Pietrangelo. Theodore was getting Norris talks this past season. He was simply fantastic, and in the playoffs really showed how good he is. So he's a bona fide top pairing blue liner. He's elite, and then you add Alex Pietrangelo, who's even better than him on that right side, and that pairing is simply lethal. It will be a fantastic pairing on both ends of the ice, probably the future top pairing for Team Canada at the 2022 Olympics if the NHL decides to go. So that pairing is just simply great and is probably the best part of Vegas' team. But the second pairing of Martinez and McNabb is solid as well. Definitely more of a defensive pairing, but solid, with a little bit of offensive upside. Martinez is no slouch. So their top four is really good, especially that top pairing. I imagine that top pairing is going to see a lot of minutes because it's simply that good, and those are two guys you want out at the ice at basically all times. But moving on to their goaltending. So their goaltending is some of the best in the National Hockey League. Their 1-2 punch of Robin Lehner and Marc-Andre Fleury is simply fantastic. Both of those guys can be starters in my opinion, but I do think that Lehner is probably the better goaltender at this stage in his career. Lehner's younger, he's put up better numbers of late, and he took the team all the way to the conference final this past playoffs. I know some Vegas fans aren't necessarily big on Lehner because they've got such an attachment to Marc-Andre Fleury, and I can understand that, but Fleury is getting older and is probably best suited in that 1B role, or maybe on some teams a 1A. Their goaltending duo is fantastic. You could argue it's one of the best, if not the best. I still think a team like Montreal or Boston or Dallas is just a step ahead of them, but I would probably have Vegas fourth as far as their tandem goes. Both those guys are starters, and Lehner could potentially have another Vezina Trophy-like season in him, as we saw on the New York Islanders. So their goaltending, no complaints there. But moving on to their best players. Now, as I previously stated, their best players, that would be their top pairing in Theodore and Pietrangelo, but also Mark Stone and Max Pacioretty and William Karlsson. You can also say a guy like Riley Smith. There's just so many good players on this team that it's hard to pinpoint down to 5 guys, but those would probably be the 5 or 6 guys that I would have. Just all fantastic players, all good two-way players. They're such a good team at both ends of the ice, and it's really highlighted by their top guys. They've built that identity around them, and it's part of the reason why they're such a good team. Their head coach, Peter DeBoer, I do think fits their system well as well. They are in ways a similar team to San Jose in their prime, so it's going to be interesting to see if he can keep up that good track record he's had. But then, moving on to some players I think that we should talk about. Now, the first player that I want to talk about is Jonathan Marchessault. Now, Marchessault had an interesting playoffs this past year. Didn't exactly look like himself. He got knocked off his game a lot. Just seemed that certain players were getting in his head. He was diving a lot, and in general hasn't necessarily looked like the player he was when he first came to Vegas. One has to wonder if we're looking at a potential decline with him, and he has been in a bit of trade rumors. I don't know if there's any credence to that, so I'm not going to get into that too much. But I just think it's going to be interesting to see what role he plays with Vegas. Ever since when he got there, he was kind of their big name, their star guy up front. But now, with the additions of Pacioretty and Mark Stone and the emergence of guys like Alex Tuch and Riley Smith, his role with the team is kind of diminished, and his numbers have taken a hit as a result of that. Another player I want to talk about is the young former 4th overall pick, Cody Glass. Now, Cody Glass has had an interesting development to the NHL. He hasn't exactly lived up to that 4th overall potential, but he says he's put on 13 pounds of muscle this past offseason, so maybe adding that strength will improve most areas in his game, as he said he was getting knocked off the puck too easily. So as long as he's kept up with his skating and speed and all of that, if he can finally put those tools together, he is a very skilled young player. So maybe we could see a breakthrough season from Cody Glass, and he could end up being their #1 center of the future and fill that #2 spot right now. But only time is going to tell. With a young player, it is hard to tell, and Cody Glass hasn't exactly lived up to expectations, and this is going to be a big year for him. If he has another disappointing year and the team has to play a guy like Chandler Stevenson at second-line center, we might see rumors about Glass' exit from the team. Vegas fans have been patiently waiting for this guy to arrive, and it just hasn't happened yet. But he's still young, he oozes potential, and hopefully for Vegas Golden Knights fans, he can hit that potential. And the last player I want to talk about is Marc-Andre Fleury. Now, Fleury was the big name when he first went to Vegas. He dragged them to the Stanley Cup final. He has been their franchise best player, but now it looks like his age is starting to show. But clearly, at least Marc-Andre Fleury's agent thinks that he still has a lot of hockey left in him and isn't best suited as a backup, and that's probably where he lands in Vegas. Maybe not a backup, but definitely a 1B. Leonard is going to get more games. He is going to be their starter for the playoffs. So yeah, Fleury isn't that pure starter anymore. And I think that might be best for Fleury at this point. He is getting older. He was very inconsistent this past season. He did look great at certain points, but at other points it was tough. Fleury's definitely lost a bit of a step, and I think that's to be expected. He's had a Hall of Fame career, and this is no, I'm not trying to hate on Marc-Andre Fleury. I love Marc-Andre Fleury. But sometimes you just got to admit when a player isn't as good as they used to be, and I think that's the case here. So, Vegas has already said that they plan on keeping Fleury around. That could be for the best for that whole locker room thing that I talked about earlier. But it's going to be interesting to see how many games he plays, what level of play he's going to be at, because that contract is very expensive for a backup. They do have a lot of money tied into their goaltending, and I'd say it's worth it because it is really good goaltending. But I do believe Fleury is still making more than Leonard, and Leonard's the starter, so one has to wonder how long that's going to last for. But as far as the category goes, I would say the Vegas Golden Knights are definitely a cup favorite. Now, Vegas has been a cup favorite for a while, basically since they entered the league. With the additions they've made, they've only got better year after year after year, and now adding Pietrangelo, getting that big signing, it's only going to put more pressure on the team and bring more attention. I do think Vegas is a cup favorite. They are, in my opinion, the second best team in the West behind Colorado. I don't know if they are going to win the Stanley Cup next year. I think the Western Conference Final could very well be Colorado and Vegas. And if that's the case, that would be one hell of a matchup. And I think whoever wins that series would probably be the Stanley Cup champion. Vegas is definitely a great team, and in my opinion, definitely a cup favorite. But that does it for today's video. I appreciate you guys watching till the end. Please leave a like, comment, subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you guys later. Bye for now.